Welcome to Rite Gud, the podcast that helps you write good. What's in a name? A lot, really. That's why they're so hard to come up with. Parents agonize over picking the right baby name for their children. We gave up on naming this podcast and went with the default working title. And as authors, sometimes it's hard to come up with a good name for your character, or your imaginary monster, or your fake magical bullshit. So in this episode, a writer named Karlo Yeager Rodriguez from a podcast named Podside Picnic joins us to talk about names.
Really F+ naming conventions there right off the bat. Who's this Karlo person? Who's he? What's his name supposed to represent? Glad to be back, honestly.
Yeager, are you a hunter?
Well, you know, it's funny. Apparently, my it's supposed to be, yeah, way back when. Apparently, an old ancestor on my dad's side, who's the German side, basically had to ask for permission to emigrate from Germany because he was like attached to some sort of local aristocrat or something. Who knows? I'm not even sure. This is like pre-mid 19th century or whatever, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, when speaking of naming and the weight that some of these names come with, we often forget just how quickly capital M modernity happened. We often forget that there were people doing cavalry charges in World War I.
Yeah, it's weird. When my great-grandpa on my dad's side came over, he had to renounce the king.
Yep.
Of Greece or whatever. I guess they still had a king or some shit.
Yeah, same here. One of the documents from Ellis Island where it does actually say so-and-so, I forget, I'm a terrible grandson. I forgot the name, but so-and-so renounces the Kaiser of Germany or whatever. You're like, oh, okay. I guess you do have to renounce your allegiances to other countries, which, you know, I guess makes sense.
Yeah, it is so weird to have to officially renounce a king, though. Are you also renouncing the wizard? You know?
This feels like, speaking of, I think we had talked a little bit offline, and you had mentioned offhand that this was the Star Wars / Glup Shitto episode.
This is the Glup Shitto episode.
Do you think that Luke had to renounce his allegiances to Tatooine whenever the rebellion took him on?
I don't even know. I feel like there were more important things he had to renounce his allegiances to, honestly.
Well, you got to remember that the weird assistant to the Emperor is like a weird wizard. Everyone else is like this bureaucrat, and it's like, oh, this fucking guy. What's he going to do? Like throw the bones in the middle of the council room? What the fuck?
That's what I imagine. I mean, he's basically like Rasputin or something, right? Yeah. Like, here's the king, here's the queen, here's like some relatively normal people, and then here's the cocaine sex wizard.
Mm-hmm. Well, or
here he is. We got one of those.
Sire, we have the royal medic, or you can choose between this man who says that we should drink mercury all the time. And he's like, I'll take the mercury guy. He looks cool.
Yeah, he's pretty sick. I like him.
He has potions made out of mercury. I've heard other people have told me that gives you immortality.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds dope. I'll take that guy. Anyway, so within the first 5 minutes, we've already gotten off topic. This is great. This is a good start. We haven't had any cat screams yet, though, so I don't know if it's officially an episode. Harley is grooming himself, and Henny is calmly looking out the window. Let's see how that lasts. Anyway, so let's talk about naming characters. Characters can be tricky enough to come up with a name when you're writing mimetic fiction. When you're writing fantasy or sci-fi, it can be even trickier. Like, do you want something really far out, or do you want something that sounds kind of normal? Because, like, yeah, maybe in 500 years we'll have people named Zap, but likely we'll probably still have people named, like, John in 500. We had dudes named John, like, 2,000 years ago. We're probably still going to have dudes named John a couple hundred years in the future.
It might be spelled differently, but yes.
Yeah.
It is funny, isn't it? Jon, Jan, John, just different variations of the same name throughout history.
And it is kind of funny which biblical names get to be kind of considered normal and which biblical names are considered weird. Like, okay, Rebecca was a biblical name and that's still acceptable, but like Jebediah would not be considered as normal.
That's a good Amish name.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's kind of like, well, why? Why is this one, why is Leah okay, but why is Zebulon a problem? I'm not really sure.
I mean, honestly, if I had been, like, if I had gone to school with a kid named Zebulon and hadn't seen him yet, I would sort of assume in little kid fashion that he's, like, part robot.
Yeah. That definitely sounds like a robot name.
But I think, to your point, it's funny, right? Because of that usage and that sort of repetition over time, it does make certain names sound much more sort of modern than others, right? Who do you know? Did you ever graduate with a Jehoshaphat? I don't think so, but it might be. I don't know. It depends on where you went to school. But those names like Jebediah, Zebulon, Jehoshaphat, we'll circle back to this one, but like stuff like Ahab and Ishmael are still, they feel like capital B Bible names. You don't really name your kid that's going to go to soccer practice that.
Yeah. And certain names are considered modern even if they're really old. Like Tiffany is a very old name. It appears at least in like the Middle Ages, but if you tried to write some kind of medieval inspired fantasy novel and the princess was named Tiffany, people would say like, are you fucking kidding me?
Well, or Brittany.
Right.
I mean, Brittany was like recorded as the name of a country, like back in I believe the what we would call high Middle Ages or whatever, right? But in any case, yeah, it's like you said, these are names that have existed. It's just for whatever reason, because and weirdly there's been some meaning attached to them more recently. Like, oh, we're going to have a Valley Girl in the Middle Ages? Come on. Tiffany, come on, man. Yeah,
what, is she going to Ye Old Mall? Come on.
She's gonna sing at the Ye Old Mall.
But it legit was a name.
Thou thinkst these alone now,
Right. So it's always tricky. Like, there are different strategies of picking names. Some authors just kind of wing it and go with it. I mean, you could do the George Lucas thing and just not give a fucking shit and call your characters bullshit like Count Dooku, which is an incredible flex.
Well, I forget where I read this. I read this just the other day, that the only reason he used, which, I mean, also, George doesn't seem to be really in on maybe the slang, because I was like, well, why would you call your bad guy Count Turd? But apparently he liked the name because it sounded a little like Count Dracula.
I guess, but
yeah, not exactly.
Not really, dude.
I mean, if it was like Count Druck or something, I'd be like, okay,
Drago or something. Like,
oh my God, could you imagine Count Drago? It's the guy.
Yeah, that'd be sick.
Dolph Lundgren. I will.
That'd
break
be great.
You, Luke.
Like a really swole, huge space dude. I'd be into it. I'd go for it. I'd be fine. It's stupid, but so's Skywalker.
Oh yeah,
Skywalker
absolutely.
is a dumbass name. It's goofy as shit. It rocks. It's very, Flash Gordon 1930s pulp trash type of name.
Let's not forget,
which is of course where the series gets its inspiration from. He was, I want to make Flash Gordon, but I can't get the rights to it. Okay, fuck it.
Also, my last name is Lucas. I'm going to call my hero character Luke. How about that?
Yeah, I love that. He just didn't give a fuck. It's so good. People just let him do it because it was the 70s and you could do that back then.
I think to our point here, it like in the prequels, it sort of, the wheels start coming off a little bit because there's a lot more characters by then. But like the original, like even the first movie, like Han Solo. Well, he's a smuggler who works alone, right?
Yeah.
It is insanely...
The word Wookiee, for naming a species a Wookiee.
Yep.
Like, it's just, of course, Simpsons reference of "I bent my Wookiee." Like, you know what this sounds like. You know this sounds like a child's euphemism for penis.
Yes. Well, I think it's also it's so funny to me that for whatever reason they found it necessary in universe to have Han Solo be named. You didn't see Solo, a Star Wars adventure or whatever?
No, I did not see that shit.
It is so bad. But like, I don't know why they had, like, again, this is like the problem, not to do a callback to lore and world building, but the problem with that sort of mindset is that, oh, well we got to have, how did Han Solo get named? It's like, who gives a shit? His name is Han Solo. He works alone. It tells you everything you need to know, man. He doesn't like working with others. He's selfish.
Yeah. Wookiee, if it's either a child slang for penis or some, like, weird British racial slur.
You can't let the Wookiees move into all.
Yeah, you know, that's like something that British people would call someone who's not English. Ew, a bunch of Wookiees moved in next door. How dreadful.
There goes the neighborhood. Oh, man. Although, after I saw the Star Wars Christmas special or whatever, I kind of get it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want them living next door either. We gotta put some standards in.
Yeah. I think you had mentioned Mission Earth not Mission Earth,
Battlefield Earth.
Oh, God.
Where the hero's name is Johnny Goodboy Tyler. Fuck you, L. Ron Hubbard.
Johnny Goodboy was the name of the dog, boy.
It's just so bad. It's so bad.
Could you imagine? I mean, like, it sounds like it is totally a line that's ripped from Indiana Jones. I don't know why you chose Good Boy. That was the name of the dog. Oh, God.
Hero protagonist.
Well, yeah, I mean that.
I get that it's a joke.
Yeah,
I get that.
It is supposed to be a joke. Slightly offensive, but not. I mean, just language play and whatnot is fun. It is weird, right? Because also then you get, speaking to your earlier thing about like biblical names, right? We've all seen a version of this where it's like, oh, you know, this far future in Dune, and the hero's named Paul. I was like, yeah, Paul, like Paul of fucking Tarsus.
Yeah.
You Philistine.
Yeah.
Like in the Bible, which exists in the Dune universe, except it's an orange Catholic Bible. The fun. Speaking of that's a great name. What is an orange Catholic Bible? My headcanon is that it's specifically Tradcast that used to live in Orange County, and this is the religion that's been catapulted into the far future.
Oh no.
It's essentially like HOA, lots of HOA commandments.
Yeah, it's really strict. And instead of having to like keep kosher or something, you gotta like, you know, these are the colors your curtains are allowed to be.
Mm-hmm, yeah, you can't have
your lawn can only grow this long.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on Arrakis, really, it's easy to keep your lawn trimmed because you don't have one.
Yeah,
so
you got
thankfully.
there.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah.
You think they're really mad at the sandworms for like fucking up their lawns, though? I bet they would be.
They would be.
They'd be really mad.
Oh, you know, those Orange Catholics would probably like devise some far future roundup or some shit.
Yeah.
Kill off all the sandworms. Fuck it.
Yeah. Yeah, like the transplants to Puerto Rico who are like, oh, these coquilles are so loud.
Right.
Can we kill them? Motherfucker.
Like,
son of a bitch.
Yeah, like I get it. Cookies are loud, but also
you're in Puerto Rico. There. Shit's loud, dude.
They're from there. You are not. Get used to it.
Yeah.
I think you'd mentioned imagining what a parent in your imaginary universe named their children.
Yeah, like that is one strategy of think of this character's backstory, the culture they come from, and also their personal backstory. What would their parents maybe have picked out for them? God,
could you imagine, like, you end up giving them the name that ends up getting them bullied at school or whatever?
Right.
Luke? The hell kind of name is that? Kill him.
Nerd.
Yeah, come on, kick him, Glup.
Yeah, kick his ass.
It turns out that Glup Shitto is a very, very popular name.
Right.
So you didn't. I'm going to guess that you didn't catch like the Andor?
I didn't catch Andor.
Okay, it is very funny that that the assumed name that Cassian Andor uses it follows the same naming convention as Glup Shitto. One syllable first name, two syllable last name, and that's like it's almost like it has a rhythm to it that you're like, oh, that's the Star Wars rhythm right there. He's like, I'm Keith Gurgo. You're like, that is Glup Shitto, my friend.
Sure. Keith Gurgo.
I love it.
Damn it.
It's so good. You know that the writers were having fun. They knew about Glup Shitto.
They must have. Good for them, honestly.
Hell yeah.
So like that's one strategy I think of picking out a name. There's another which do you want to do the thing that a lot of writers do, which is like pick a symbolic and meaningful name. That's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of writers do it, but if you lean into it too hard, it can like end up sounding cutesy and annoying and possibly offensive. I'm thinking of J.K. Rowling a little bit, who's like one black character is called, what is it, like Kingsley Shacklebolt.
Ooh.
Just like we're okay.
Okay.
Yeah, all right.
Well, wasn't also the other thing was Cho Chang is not like
not really a proper not a proper like Chinese name in any way.
Yeah, it's like okay, great.
you can be it can get a little cutesy. I mean, granted, she was writing for children, which I think is fine to get like cutesy with names when it's literally for children. Mm-hmm. When a bunch of mid-40s millennials have decided that this is how you should write, then it's a little more troubling.
Yeah, it can become like a weird signifier to others that this is the way you should do it, and I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't follow the weird transphobe lady with the castle.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, but can we choose a name that immediately kind of tells you who the character is? Not necessarily like, here's what the name means, but this guy kind of sounds like a Jimbo, or this, we're going to call this really bitchy white woman named Karen or something like that. Like, maybe you can do that. If you want your audience to know immediately who this asshole is, like, that's not necessarily a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'll cop, and I know it might be a little gauche to be self-referential.
No, it's fine.
I've used that naming convention several times in short fiction, especially in short fiction where
you need to get to the fucking point.
Yeah, and also like realism is sometimes can be a little overrated. So, like if I'm gonna tell you a story about a brother that comes back from the dead, the sister is named Martha, and and the brother's called Lazarus. So. And also, it falls within the purview, right? Because, like, old-timey Puerto Rico love their Catholic names, Let's name kids after saints.
Sure, why not? I mean, I can believe it.
Speaking of ironic names, right? Like, up in the hills.
Yeah, like an asshole named, like, Dr. Goodman or something like that.
Counterpoint to that, James Bond had Dr. No. You know what his bedside manner's like, right?
Yeah.
But like, in Up in the Hills, I think I used ironic names for Grace and Peter, specifically because like Peter is not the rock that she hopes for, and she does not receive grace. So.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, it can work. I mean, honestly, in short fiction, there's a lot of stuff that the rules are very fluid, and there's nothing that's hard set. Whatever works.
And especially if you're doing pulp.
Oh, like that's great.
A lot of the rules can go out the window, and you can absolutely be cheesy as fuck.
Well, I mean, back to our example of Luke Skywalker. Corny ass fucking name.
Corny ass shit name.
Works perfectly for pulp
great
adventure.
It's perfect. It tells you like this is a goofy ass pulp adventure story with space wizards in it. Let's fucking go.
Yeah, and anyone who's a Skywalker, they're probably the hero, I'm going to guess. I do want to point out that there's also different things that you can do with names, right? Obviously, I don't know if you've ever played RPGs, but there's always the problem, right? Because you come in with, I don't know, like Krendor of Gargaria. He's a barbarian, blah, blah, blah. And then somebody comes up, and my character's name's Steve. He's a sorcerer. You're like, come on, man. You're like you don't fit. What the hell? I'm over here playing Conan, and you're over there playing Terry Pratchett. What the fuck?
Or, of course, the fun adolescent thing of naming your hero who saves the world, like Fart Master or something like that. That's always fun.
I feel like that's a similar sentiment to when you got the high score in a video game and just putting in ASS as your initials.
Hell yeah.
You know that's a lot of fun. They're gonna be reading ass. But yeah, like I think that it is very funny to do that, right? Like it feels like adolescently edgy, Yeah.
So there's that strategy. There's also a lot of things with references. Like, are you using a reference in a way that is intentional or really careful, or is it just like you recognize that name? Yeah.
Hey, you remember when my character did the thing? Yeah, you remember when the character did the other thing? And just do a complete like your name is essentially the Chris Farley bit of referencing over and over again things. Although that would be interesting, right? Could you imagine like a hero of many, like the person who is the hero of many campaigns? They keep on adding stuff. Right. Saver of the world, defender of the holy pastry. You're like, what the fuck?
Let's see. I was wondering if you do this. When you're coming up with a name for a character, do you Google your proposed name to find out, wait, is this already somebody well known?
I don't think I've done that yet. Which isn't to say that that'll never happen, but at the same time, like I don't know, I don't think I've ever used like a name that is recognizable. But yeah, I think that's I don't think that's a bad practice. Just to make sure that if there's some sort of context that you're missing, cultural or otherwise, you just do due diligence. Don't I don't know, like make sure that you're not being offensive. Make sure that you're not referencing like a character who is the opposite of what you want. Like if you are naming a very saintly character or good character, please, look it up. Maybe you don't want to call him Vlad Tepes. Turns out that guy has a lot of stuff behind his name, a lot of baggage.
Yeah, he's a naughty boy. Which, I mean, there's nominative determinism there. Like Vlad Tepes is an extremely spooky name. And that's who he was. Yeah,
and also I also love the detail that Dracula is like basically the little dragon.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, he's a little dragon.
He's a little dragon. He's a small bean dragon.
Do you think that calling him Little Dragon gave him like the Napoleon complex?
Yeah, it could be. I'll show you, Turks.
Yeah. But yeah, like I think that something that is interesting to me is when someone gathers different names to themselves, which, I mean, we're going to probably reference Tolkien here, of course, because
eventually.
But like Gandalf has many names depending on which culture he's visiting or whatever. He's Gandalf mostly, but was it Mithrandir? I forget. He's got a bunch of other names. Gandalf Greyheim, Gandalf Warcrow, less positive ones. When he's just the guy that tells it to you straight. People don't like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I over the course of your life, you gather different names or nicknames or monikers or what have you. Like that's another thing. I think you had referenced like also over time, right? Like perhaps you have different cultures have like a name a initial name or a family name that's kept reserved, and then you give your forward-facing name, so to speak.
Yeah, like some cultures have a lot of different names. Of you use this one name in public, you use a different name in private, or there are like nickname conventions or something. I just remember trying to read Crime and Punishment, and every character has like 8 names because that's just how they do it in Russia, and just feeling completely fucking lost. Like, who's Dunya? Like, no, that's a nickname for Anya. Like, what? How is that a nickname for Anya? What the fuck? And just like getting really, really angry and giving up on the book because I can't remember everyone's name.
What is this nonsense?
And there are other cultures. I mean, in the West, in the United States, you have your legal name given to you at birth, and it's very difficult to change it. You have to go through all these legal procedures and shit. That's not how typically throughout human society, that's not how it has always been in a lot of other cultures at a lot of other times. There's not like an official government registry and government IDs and social security numbers and shit. So like, if you want to change your name, it's fine. No one's really going to stop you as long as other people start calling you that. That's your fucking name now. So like, and you might change it depending on your accomplishments. So like, Sitting Bull at birth was given a name that means like jumping badger. And he was nicknamed Hunkeshni, which means slow as a kid, but like that's not slow as like an insult. That's slow as just like thinking things through and being cautious and not,
deliberate. And cautious,
yeah, like deliberate. And then he was renamed Tatanka Yotanka, which means Sitting Bull, as a teenager after he showed courage in battle. So, you know, this is a guy who's gone through multiple name changes because that's how it was in that culture. You'd have your birth name, and then it was understood that your identity would evolve, so you'd change your name, and that was fine. And that wasn't such a big deal. It's just with us, because we have these legal registries, changing your name is kind of a pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think as a small tangent, I think that's gotten even more difficult with, you know, like Patriot Act bullshit, where essentially online you're supposed to have like, what is it? Is it Real ID or whatever the fuck it's called? Where you're supposed to present actual proof that you're named the way you present yourself online, which defeats sort of the purpose, a lot of the purposes of why people are online. I think, like you said, like in general, there is the legal framework, which seems to be completely separate and out of step with just sort of how pragmatically and practically people have used names for forever, pretty much.
Right, right.
Speaking of like nicknames, let me give you a small anecdote. Now, I may have mentioned this before to other people, but it makes me laugh every time. When I was in the Navy, we got a new lieutenant assigned to our division, and the rumor was that the lieutenant was like an officer that had come straight out of Annapolis, which is to say, in sort of like grunt lingo, what the context was that, oh, he's a real asshole, because Annapolis is the premier officer training academy for naval officers. And one of the things that apparently they ingrain is that you should never trust enlisted people that work under you to give you like the straight and narrow or whatever. You should always double check them, because they might be a little crafty and try to pull one over on you, right? So the idea is that the rumors started coming around that he was a bit of an asshole. And it's like, okay. And in fairness, he was. But he came around, like his initial introduction was coming around and go like, yeah, my name is Lieutenant Kobieski. But you know what? I'll be fine if you just call me Cobes. Which, let me just point out, you never get to choose your nickname. Your nickname is always chosen by somebody else, and it's always slightly insulting. Yes.
Yeah. Like remember that episode of Seinfeld where George is trying to get people to call him T-Bone? It doesn't work. It doesn't work. No one starts calling him T-Bone, but then they see him getting really mad and like waving his arms. And they're like, hey, he kind of looks like that gorilla that knows the sign language. What's her name? Coco. And they start calling him Coco instead. And he's so mad. It's such a good episode.
George mad?
He's so fun. Call me T-Bone. Everyone's like, no, we're not calling you T-Bone. No one's calling you T-Bone, George.
Yeah, I mean, it is just one of those things that just boggled my mind. Like, I was, all of maybe 18, maybe 19 at the time, and I knew that. I was like, come on, man. You don't get to choose your nickname. Come on, man.
Yeah.
Also, I found this so funny to me that, like, you're an officer. You don't need us to look up to you. You already are above us in the hierarchy.
Yeah, it's that I need you to obey me, but you also have to like me and think I'm your friend and think I'm cool. Like, no.
How about no?
No, I'm not going to do that.
How about we keep that class divide real nice and
Yeah.
Solid. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to share that because it's still to this day just makes me laugh. I'll think about it randomly at occasionally and be like, what an asshole.
All right. So bringing it back, setting a tone, we got to talk about the names in Moby Dick a little bit because, I mean, I'm not the first person to point this out, but Moby Dick works a lot better when your characters are named things like Ishmael and Ahab and not like Steve and Bob. If the book started with Call Me Bob, like this would... no. These very weird, olden times, over-the-top nicknames kind of convey a real sense of something that, like, this is something that's hyper-real, that's not totally realistic, that's not really meant to be taken literally. And that works a lot better when you've got characters named Starbuck and stuff like that.
Well, I mean, I think that Melville was really cooking, right? He knew what he had, right? And he's like, you know what else is like hyper real and we're supposed to take it seriously and it's like laden with symbolism? Biblical shit.
Oh yeah, like using these biblical names about a group of people, outcasts, sort of wandering in a desolate environment. Like, oh, I get it. Well, you're doing something here.
Speaking of, like you just made me remember, it's essentially like that entire cycle of ancient prophets, but instead of going out into the desert, it's the opposite. You're going out into the ocean.
Right.
And I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think it can only work with that sort of hyper reality that something so laden with symbolism would bring to it, because it's such a weird book. I love it, but it is capital W-B weird.
And that he comments on it too. He notes that the captain's name is Ahab, and is just like, well, that's quite a name. He doesn't just let it go. He very much underlines, like, look, I know you're a 19th century person. You probably recognize the name Ahab from the Bible, and it would be weird if this character didn't say something about it. Like, yeah, I'm acknowledging that. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that also is a testament to Melville knowing, like, he's in on it. It's one of these things that I always get a little frustrated by when people are like, did the author know? Blah, blah. Of course they know.
Of course he fucking knew.
Come on, man. He did it intentionally. And that sort of like puts the cherry on top, right? Like he's like almost metatextually telling you, yeah, I know about this. You know about this. Let's talk about it a little bit.
Let's acknowledge the elephant in the room.
I would also argue that his, the whales chapter is like also completely a bit of a meta joke. It's like, oh yeah, they're all fish. And you're like, no, come on. Herman, you know that's not true.
God, multiple chapters about whale phrenology. It's incredible. It's so fucking good. Multiple chapters. Hell yeah.
One thing I did want to point out, I think we had discussed this, and I think perhaps it might be time to talk a little bit about the tangent of place names as well. Because, I mean, like, sometimes you get place names that are just, like, they make sense in world, but sometimes it's like, I just want to have a string of syllables that sound like they flow really cool and give you almost an onomatopoeic feeling of what this is, right? I'm rereading a series of books, the first one being Lord Fowl's Bane, and I love that the titular volcano of the fantasy setting is called, in their language, Kirill Threndor. I love it. It just rolls off the tongue and you're like, Threndor. That sounds ominous. And of course it is. It's a fucking volcano. It could go off at any moment.
Yeah. I am very much in favor of nonsense syllables that just sort of sound right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Jabba sounds like a fat guy name.
Yeah,
I'm down.
I mean, to your earlier point, and I don't think I had heard it said aloud, but I hadn't really noticed how much of a flow, what is it, Tatanka Yatanka has? Mm-hmm. And you're like, did they just choose that because it sort of rhymes? I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it could be.
Could be. I mean,
but it sounds good. It's pretty cool.
Like, have you ever seen Gabagool spelled out? It's not Gabagool. It's Capicoldi.
Yeah.
That's how it it's written out. It's CAP, so on and so forth, right? But the thing that people forget is that folks will definitely make sure that something that is said will sound fucking cool, man.
Hell yeah.
So you go for flow rather than a certain rhythm to it, rather than formal stuff, which also goes into a name, right?
Yeah, it's got to sound nice. It's got to have a nice ring to it if people are going to say it out loud.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I wanted to point out, good old George R.R. Martin. We probably overuse some of the same people over and over again, but I do think that he's really good with this because he has a variety of different names in these books that tell you something about the character and about what their station is as well, right? Like you have Arya, who's also hanging out with a kid that's nicknamed Hot Pie. And what does Hot Pie do? Well, he's like a chubby kid who was a baker's apprentice. So, I mean...
Yeah, people would name that kid Hot Pie. I can believe that.
Yep, because that's what he's calling. Like, before the war started, that's what he would be out in the street, like, calling out. It's like, Hot Pies, gotta get your Hot Pies here. It's like like, imagine naming the guy at the baseball games, like a medieval baseball game, like, Red Hot. His name is Red Hot.
Yeah, get your red hots here.
Speaking of nicknames, it's slightly insulting, but it also tells you exactly where this character's from. Like, what station, like, he's not nobility. He's no one important. He just sells hot pies.
Yep.
And he also likes eating hot pies a lot, too.
God. And George R.R. Martin's a fat guy, so he can get away with saying you can't accuse him of fat shaming.
He loves his meals. You can tell in every page.
He fucking loves his food. He will just take a break from the narrative to describe some lunch. And I respect that.
Hell yeah.
I respect that. But anyway, so you can really set a tone and give an idea give the readers an idea of how they're supposed to engage with this work. With the names you choose, are you choosing goofy pulp names? Are you choosing very realistic names? Are you choosing very biblical names? Stuff like that. And also, when you're writing a second world story, you can do a little bit of efficient world building. Oh no, I'm a liar. I like world building now. What have we done? But you can do a little bit of efficient sort of telling us about the world based on the characters' names. Like the Puritans liked to name their kids, especially their daughters, after virtues like Constance and Prudence. So if that's the naming convention you're choosing for your, say, fantasy novel, this is telling us, one, this is a very moralistic society, and two, here are the principles that they care about the most. Here's what they value. There's kind of a grotesque mirror image version of this in the, I know it's very problematic, movie Idiocracy, where characters are named things like Frito and Dr. Lexus, because it's showing us, well, this is what this society values. It values like stupid consumer bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, it is more or less what we've been talking about for a bit here, right? That like it's supposed to convey some sort of detail about the world. If your world is one that has, like, again, has a guy named Paul in it, well, guess what? Maybe it could be that they really like the Beatles, you know? It could be that they're very biblical. It could be a variety of different things. But depending on some of the other details, Paul in and of itself isn't necessarily, it's just a data point. It needs to be connected to something else. And generally speaking, again, not to do a callback to the world building episode, but I think that is part of thinking about how your world works, be it in short or long form. Again, if you have like a world that works on Conan, you have Conan and Sindarian and whatnot, maybe Bob isn't really a name that fits in that. What does Bob mean other than something that is in the water and floats? I do want to also point out that apart from that, there are variants of this where it becomes very sort of abstracted. I'm thinking about, again, Tolkien, where one of the funnier things is that Tolkien does not give you like the real supposed name, the untranslated names of the characters. So, for instance, Frodo Baggins is apparently a translation of the, quote, original language, the Western tongue. His name was it Maura Labingi or Labingi? I'm not entirely sure. And he decided to filter it through Old English, where Frod means wise by experience in Old English. It is very funny to think about it, but it is like this very, very old timey, almost like I think it's like almost a Gothic technique, right? Where you're lending your text verisimilitude because the author supposedly, quote, found it. It is a found document, which is honestly in genre is often a way to play a lot. So Tolkien did it, but also later on, Gene Wolfe did it as well. But Gene Wolfe did it in a very interesting way where he uses existing English words to describe, or as he cheekily mentions in the afterword to the first book of the New Sun, interpret future things with like an existing word. So, like, for instance, one of the things is that he'll love to be like, oh, he uses destrier to describe, like, essentially like these battle horses, right? And that's what a destrier is. In medieval times, you'd have, essentially, it's like think of like a Clydesdale, but battle hardened. That's more or less what you're talking about, like a war horse. They're heavy. They need to be heavy because they need to carry like a guy in full armor, blah, blah, so on and so forth. But later on, he'll be like, and then the destrier's extended its talons. And you're like, wait, what? You had to be careful of the destrier's fangs. And you're like, hold on. This is not the shape of the creature that I had in my head. What am I? What is a destrier? And a lot of it is exactly that, right? He's trying to alienate, to a certain extent, our feeling of what this future world would be. But he doesn't want you to get too hung up on how strange it is, so he'll use like just generic regular words that we could find, or also combinations. Like he would make up like different combinations of like Latin plus Greek nomenclature, scientific stuff to just make up a certain type of creature or whatever.
Right.
So I mean, in that sense, he's just trying to show you that just as the past is, the future is a completely different place.
Yeah. Now, before we go on into naming speculative elements, I just want to say a couple last things about names, about personal names. If you're planning to write your fantasy novel or your sci-fi novel, it's really worthwhile to study naming conventions outside of North America. How do people in other cultures, other languages give names? How do people in other eras give names or receive names? Because I really want to stress it's not the same universally. The way we do things now in contemporary America is not the way we've always done things and always will. Like, for example, just last names, family name conventions. In Iceland, you don't pass on your last name. Your name, like so-and-so's daughter or so-and-so's son. So if your name is Sven and your dad is Gunnar, then you're Sven Gunnarsson. But if your name is Freydis, like a certain not Latin American author, and your dad is Gunnar, then you're Freydis Gunnarsdóttir. So like a family of four with mom and dad and brother and sister will have four different last names. You just don't pass it on in the same way. If your society's matriarchal, you might pass names down through the mother's side and not the father's. And also that names have magical power in a lot of traditional folklore, especially about fairies. So like, learn a little bit about the way other cultures handle names, and you can use some of that when you're naming characters, because it's kind of annoying when you're reading what's supposed to be like a second world fantasy novel and everybody just kind of feels like Americans. I don't like that. Please don't do that.
Yeah. I mean, even something as simple as like Latin American naming conventions, right? It just throws people in the US off, right?
Yeah, like why you got so many?
Because we have mothers. That's. I mean, I'm not saying that as a dig against you. That is actually the usual joking response. It's like, why do I have Rodriguez as another last name? It's like, because I have a mother, and we want to display what her last name was. And that's more or less it. It's just the way you delineate is by the patronymical is the first one and the matrilineal is the second one. Or did I say patronymical or patrilineal name? I should say. Anyway, it is, and that's just Latin America, and that's not like thousands and it's not around the other side of the planet. It's to the south of the U.S.
It's not that far.
Yes.
Many of you listeners have traveled there to get drunk at least once.
Cinco de Drunko.
Yay.
But yeah, you know what? Cinco de Mayo, I said that as a joke, but that's an interesting, speaking of naming conventions, that has become like this weird, that's the holiday. And you're like, not in Mexico. It's only a holiday in the U.S. It's an important day, but it wasn't like Independence Day. It isn't like July 4th in the U.S. Let's put it that way. I would also argue that maybe July 4th isn't really like July 4th in the U.S. either. But that's another story. There is a certain penchant, if you will, for flattening things in the U.S. Partly because we seem to love monoculture, and that's sort of like not how things work. Like it is very difficult to make an entire planet one thing. Let's put it that way. So it's a perfectly fine convention in sci-fi, right? To have like an entire planet that's one ecosystem. You're like, okay.
Right.
Like Dune.
It's one ecosystem. It's one language. It's one culture.
Right.
It's one climate somehow.
I don't think that these are bad things, and I'm not saying that we should take those away, like take the toys away from the kiddies or anything like that. It's just simply that that's what everyone does. If you wanted to stand out, however, you would have in your sci-fi, space opera epic, maybe the planet has different factions, different cultures on it. Maybe just one more. I mean, like, think of, like, we'd mentioned Left Hand of Darkness, but, like, just by adding another country to the planet just felt like an opening up.
Yeah, it felt a lot richer. And that it was a really, really, really different society, too. One is a monarchy, the other's vaguely Soviet, kind of.
Yeah, like parliamentary council, something's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think that there's no wrong way to do this, but honestly, I think that what this is all about is mainly ways for you to stand out from the pack a little bit. And I know that this is sort of like a weird needle to thread, because you want to stand out, but obviously if you want to have commercial success, you don't want to stand out too much.
Yeah.
But, you could always stand out just a little bit. I mean,
and legit, like, some writers do have trouble coming up with shit. Some writers are like, fuck, what do I name this? I don't know.
I mean, but that's also what revisions are for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You go, well,
or you could be like us, where it's like, what are we going to call our podcast? I don't know. We should avoid puns about writing. Let's just call it Rite Gud for now, and that's what we stuck with, because we just couldn't figure out anything else. We gave up. We just gave up. That's how we named our podcast. We gave up. But anyway, do we want to transition into naming your magical bullshit, naming your speculative elements?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. The question is, do you use the Z word? Like, as Shaun of the Dead asks, if you have a conventional thing, like zombies or werewolves or vampires, do you call it zombie or werewolf or vampire, or do you come up with your own word, and why or why not? Like, I know a lot of zombie stories deliberately avoid the word zombie because it's a goofy word, but if you're like using your own made-up name, like, why are you doing that? What does it add? What does it add to say, like, well, in my story, vampires are called blood thieves? Like, well, why? Why are they called blood thieves? Why aren't they just called vampires?
They're called Peter Thiel.
Yeah, they're called venture capitalists.
There you go.
Yeah.
Silent Partners. Actually,
Yeah.
Silent Partners is the name of a cabal of vampires in the Venture Brothers.
Oh, that's so good.
It is very good. It is very good.
That rocks.
But what do you call it? Yeah, I find that it's fine, but it can also get a little sort of like, come on, guys, just call them zombies. It's fine.
Just call them zombies. Like they're Walking Dead. They're zombies. Just call them a fucking zombie.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that The Walking Dead has a nice rhythm to it as like a title of a work.
Oh, it's a great title.
Yeah. The fact that the show, and I'm no big fan of the show, but my partner is, and she has watched everything. And which means that I secondhand watch it sometimes. And they have like walkers, shamblers, I don't know, a bunch of other, stuff in there, and you're like, okay, that's fine, I guess. Can someone just call them zombies? It's fine. No one's gonna, roll their eyes at you calling them zombies.
Yeah, I would call it a zombie if I was dealing with zombies. I'd go for it.
I feel like Zombieland was like a weird turning point, right? Like almost like it got cooties on it because it's like, oh, they call it Zombieland because it's funny.
Yeah.
And I mean, the movie is a bit of a comedy-ish thing. I don't know if it all works, but it's fine. But yeah, I think to your point, it does feel like the Z word has cooties on it and no one wants to say it anymore. I do think that part of that is that it sounds silly, but also part of it is that it's been overdone.
It is just incredibly funny to hear a character say the word zombie. Like, oh no, you got eaten by a zombie. Like, no matter how serious you're trying to make the scene, it's just like, zombies. Like, I think in George Romero's trilogy, he never says zombie, right? They're called ghouls or something.
Oh, really?
I think so. I don't think they use the word zombie. I
don't think I've seen, what is it? Is it, what's the third one? Is that Day of the Dead?
Day of the Dead.
That's the one I have yet to watch.
I don't know if they ever use the word zombie in it. They tend to call them ghouls or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and even the titles
are the first one.
The titles are all what, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean,
I get it, but I do like the word zombie. It's fun.
Yeah, I like it.
It's a fun word. It's campy, but I don't care. A lot of zombie stuff is campy, and I'm cool with that. Yeah. It's fun. So like, do you use the classic word? Do you make up your own thing? And if you're making up your own thing, are you doing the bunch of nonsense syllables, which honestly can be fun if it sounds right. If you can make it work, fucking go for it.
Yeah. It is a very funny move, though, to be
It's high risk, high reward, because if you don't make it work, then you just sound like a complete asshole. But if you can make it work, it's like, fuck yeah, way to go, you did it.
Yeah, it is very funny. I remember teenage me wanted to do that. Oh, those people in my fantasy world, they're called Yishnaelfi. But everyone calls them elves. It's like, oh, okay.
Oh, God damn it.
It is very funny to pull that, right? Like, that would be a very funny move to pull. It's like, oh, in my culture, they're called, 15 syllables. But also, everyone just calls them... That's too long. Everyone just calls them zombies.
Yeah. So we've got a bunch of, like, kind of common strategies that people use to name their speculative element. There's the bunch of nonsense syllables. There's the innocuous name for the very bad thing, which is popular in dystopian fiction, like the carousel in Logan's Run. Like, oh, they're doing a carousel. What's a carousel? Oh, it's not good. So Logan's Run it's a story about a dystopian future in which when you turn 30 years old, you die. And the carousel is like this death ritual that they have for people when they hit 30.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, it's like you go in this big spinny room and you float up and then you explode.
There you go.
There you go. Bam.
It's very pleasurable. It's very fun until you explode.
They seem like they're having a great time.
Right up until they explode, yes.
Right until they explode. Everyone's like, woo, yeah.
You reminded me of The Lottery.
Yeah, The Lottery, because it is a lottery.
It is totally a lottery.
That is the very YA dystopian thing too, is to like pick an innocuous name, but it's capitalized, and it's like, oh, uh-oh. It's like, she's going to the tournament with the capital T, and we know this is a bad tournament. We know it's real bad.
Well, it's also like the old timey like Silver Age sci-fi. It's like Eugene woke up early for the procedure, and you're like, oh shit, he's getting fucked up.
Yeah, it's a little, I don't know about it. Like, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I feel like we had post-Hunger Games, like, way too many YA novels that did that altogether, so I think, like, we need to take a break from that for a little while. Maybe come back to it later. But I think like right now it's a little bit played out, and we need to give it a little time to breathe before we can go back to that.
Yeah, and again, it's a perfectly fine thing, but like it's just also you sort of want to stand out.
Yeah.
You want your work to stand out a little bit, so maybe don't telegraph that by capitalizing procedure that it might be a bad thing.
Yeah, we do that. If you've created a conlang like Tolkien, you can obviously use stuff from that, but like really, if you have not studied linguistics and you're trying to create a conlang, I don't know how well it's gonna work, because the dude was a linguist at Oxford. He was brilliant. He studied historical linguistics. He was a really well-educated academic in linguistics, so he knew how this shit worked. If you haven't studied linguistics at all, your conlang might come out kind of like very clearly goofy bullshit. So be careful. I'm asking you to read some books.
You just reminded me that one of a very good essay, I believe it's by Diana Wynne-Jones, she took classes with Tolkien.
Wow.
And the thing that is very funny about her essay about she's talking about narrative and how, apart from being a linguist, he was like just a fucking whiz. He knew narrative inside and out. And the funny story that she tells is that she took his class and he spent like the first 2 weeks just sort of like talking to the chalkboard, like he obviously writing stuff on the chalkboard, and so essentially it was all a way for him to winnow out the people who were just taking it like as maybe as an elective or some shit, because people dropped out after a while, and then it became clear to her, because she was like very fascinated by what he had to say, that he just knew how to tell stories. He knew shapes of stories, different ways that they were told throughout time. Again, like you said, his linguistics also, deployed rather effectively in his works. But yeah, like it is very funny to me that he just had like a class. It was like, yeah, the first 2 weeks are just like, let's see if I can annoy enough people that they drop out, and the remainder are the people that really, really want to learn.
That's hardcore.
Amazing.
Okay, so we've got that. We got the nonsense syllables. We got the let's come up with some kind of euphemism or something instead of using the traditional name. And I don't think there's anything wrong with using a traditional name. I would get annoyed if someone wants to like use a less traditional name for a monster from a different culture, but then have it be the same thing. No, this isn't a gremlin. This is a chupacabra. Like, but it's not acting like a chupacabra. You're just doing some bullshit right now. I don't know. It's not a real chupacabra. I'm mad.
You didn't. Oh no, they didn't explore. They didn't explore the lore enough.
Yeah.
I think it's a fine line, right? If you want to do something newish with an old monster, can an old monster learn new tricks? Let's see. But yeah, like I think that you have to a certain extent. It's threading that needle, right? It's trying to be different, but not so different that you just go like you said, people that are like, oh, I love zombies, but that's not a fucking zombie, man. Fuck this bullshit. My
vampires can go out during the day and they don't drink blood. Fuck you. Fuck you. That's all I have to say.
I mean, unless you do something fun with it, right? Like, what is it, the energy vampire? And
yeah, that one's okay. I like that one. That was good.
But again,
I fucking love the energy vampire. He's just your worst coworker.
Yeah,
that's pretty great.
That's it. That's a perfect example of going different. And that one even sort of breaks the rules, right? Vampires drink blood. Well, what if we just say blood is energy in your body?
Right.
So I think that, again, that's The one character that everyone just absolutely thinks is great is that one, because he sucks so much.
He's just the goddamn worst. He's great. All these like very olden times gothic characters, and in the midst of it, just your worst fucking coworker.
Yeah, he's just like he looks like the worst incarnation of a CPA or something, you know?
Because you know that guy.
Yeah,
you work with that fucking guy. If you work in an office, there's at least one of those fucking guys in that.
And you avoid them like the plague whenever they're near the water cooler.
Yeah.
You're suddenly, never mind, I'm not thirsty anymore, bye.
I don't need water. I'm fine. I don't need water anymore.
Yeah, I see Wayne over by the water cooler. Fuck that guy. I'm not thirsty.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is, yeah, you can make it work if you decide, well, my vampires don't drink blood. Like, you know what? Maybe you can make it work, but you got to be really, really fucking good. This is, high risk, high reward. So here's a very common trick for for naming your magical bullshit. And I actually tend to go with this one. I love it. I'm sure other people will be like, oh, that's what you're going with. But plucking from a foreign language. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. I love it. It's very effective. It's very cheap, but just please don't pull a J.K. Rowling and do it without looking up the grammar. Like, apparently she named the Japanese magic school Magic Place, but she used the wrong part of speech for the word magic, and it's just grammatically nonsense or something in Japanese. For your money, you could have hired a person who speaks Japanese to help you with this. You just didn't give a fuck. No one gave a fuck because you can just print money. Okay, fuck you. But it's cheap. It's easy, but I love it because it works. The use of Spanish in Resident Evil 4, it works. You take a boring ass word, Del Lago. It works because it's Spanish. It's cool.
You do not know the thrill of recognition I had when the first villager just yells out, Forastero! I was like, I recognize this language. It is very funny, though, that it's just straight up Spanish, from Spain with the lisps and everything. It's great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Maybe, my Spanish is trash. You actually speak Spanish properly, so, maybe it's different for you. But it fucking worked for me, man.
Well, I mean, just to give you an example, and this might be a little... this is sort of historical insensitivity. The word gibberish, right, which is derived... one of the possible etymological derivations is from the language of a name of a famous 8th century Muslim alchemist, Jabir ibn Hayyan. I'm gonna slaughter that name. So basically, in Latinate versions, it is spelled Geber sometimes, and that one of the theories is that it became gibber to gibberish. And I'm going to guess that jabbering as well probably has a similar root, which is to say that this is something that I think people perhaps underestimate just how much ancient cultures thought that language itself was magical.
The origin of the word barbarian, it just means non-Greek speaker. That's all it means. If you don't speak Greek, barbar was their version of blah blah. So, if you weren't a Greek speaker, everything they said was just bar, 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 bar to you. So, if you were not a Greek speaker, you were a barbarian.
See, now I'm imagining, right before being overrun, there's this one random Greek guy going, doing the hand flapping, going, well, whatever, these guys. Fucking blah, 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 blah. Killing me with blah, blah, blah.
Yada, yada. We're being conquered.
Glamour is one of the roots of it is believed to be grammar, right?
Huh.
Think about how, the Faustian bargain is very much, based on contractual law.
Yeah, and in so much fiction, you make magic happen by saying the right words. You need to say these certain words to make it work.
Oh, you just reminded me. I forgot all about this, but this is actually, I don't know if this is part of the Apocrypha or some other mythologies that divide. Maybe it's from like a Jewish tradition. I forget, but apparently it might still be in the Bible. I don't remember right now, but in Genesis, Adam is basically, God brings like a parade of animals so that Adam can give them their, quote, true names.
Right.
And supposedly that's, we're supposed to believe that Adam was the one that named. I don't know how God got an octopus or a naked mole rat in front of him, but but he named them those words.
So if you are picking the foreign language route, if you are picking the foreign language trick, it's worthwhile to consider how it's going to sound. I think I remember coming across like an aspiring writer who wanted to use German terms for their monsters because, like, German's a scary sounding language. It sounds cool and intense, but the trouble is that, like, he wanted this race of monster called the Dark Children, but in German, the Dark Children is die Dunkelkinder, which does not sound spooky or intimidating. It sounds like a delightful pastry.
Yes, well,
or something.
The kingdom runs on Dunkel.
Yeah, the Dunkelkinder seems like one of those layered pastries that are like in a whimsical shape. Like that's probably what it is. So like, that's you picked German because you thought it would sound cool. No, it didn't. It sounds goofy.
You gently fold the child into the pastry.
I think Suzanne Collins actually used Latin really effectively in Hunger Games. Yeah, okay, it's YA, but like Latin fits the whole Colosseum gladiator motif really, really well. Mm-hmm. She used a lot of Latinate terms. I remember there's a bit in the book where Katniss encounters an enslaved person who, like, basically the punishment for trying to rebel is they cut out your tongue and enslave you, and such a person is called an avox. Which, without voice, it's Latin. And, like, there's a lot of little things throughout the books like that. And I think it works really, really well for the environment of the story. And if you're an English speaker, you know enough Latinate roots to get this sort of half recognition. Maybe you haven't studied etymology, but you use enough Latin terms to, like, connect with it at a subconscious level.
Even the name of the setting is reference, right, to blood and
Pan Am
circuses.
Or something like that. Yeah, and it is well handled. Like, yeah, okay, it's YA, but I think it's a really solid YA series, and and I think it's well done. I think the way some of the names are a little bit over the top, but like Katniss, okay, this is a society where like everybody's hungry as shit. Yeah, you're gonna name somebody after an edible plant.
Yeah,
sure you will. I'm fucking hungry. Let's have some Katniss.
Well, that would be, that is an interesting point. The way that hunger works is that you end up focusing on food. So why wouldn't you call your kids like food items? They're the hope for the future. So you hope for food.
Right, and it's an arrowhead plant or something like that.
Oh, so. I did not know that. Hey, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I just Googled this. It comes from the edible arrowhead plant, which was known as Katniss in the language of the Lenape. And she's half indigenous in the books. So it's like very fitting, it's very well chosen, but it's not like hitting you over the head with it,
I never figured Jennifer Lawrence for being half indigenous.
No, she's not. The casting with the movie's kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
very clear.
It's very Hollywood. Yeah, it's very Hollywood.
Yeah. So Frank Herbert's use of Arabic in Dune, we got to talk about that. And respect for him to calling the big worm not something that just means like big worm or something, which would be a little too easy. But Shai Hulud apparently means something immortal in Arabic. So it's not just like, oh yeah, that's the big worm. It's called Big Worm. It's like Shai Hulud. Like, okay, within the culture of the Fremen, you're not going to necessarily call the super worm like the big worm. You're going to give it a really special name, which, like, respect to that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, you want to hear something very funny? Sometimes works will play telephone with each other. When Hayao Miyazaki did Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, the big giant insects were called umu, right? Which is basically, I think that's what the translations were in Dune, What that translates to from what I'm gathering here, in Japanese, in the kanji for king and insect or bug. So, yeah, it's just basically king insect. I say telephone because basically Miyazaki was, he totally says that Dune was a complete influence on Nausicaa. So, but anyway, it is very funny. Speaking of like he didn't even bother using a different language for his name. He's like, yeah, I'm just gonna use Japanese. Everyone's gonna know that this is king insect.
Miyazaki can get away with it because it's Miyazaki.
I mean, he does everything else. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It would be very funny for me to just use like Spanish words for magical shit.
Hell yeah. Do it.
Not even like old-timey Spanish words, just regular Spanish words.
Yeah. I do think it is worth, if you're going to do the picking another language, like consider what the language is, what the history is, what the associations are, and how we use foreign language. I mean, in English, we borrow so much vocabulary. We have so many loan words, but what do we use German loan words for in English? What do we use Latin words for? What do we use French words for? So on and so forth. So like a German word might be for some sort of psychological or philosophical term, because we borrow a lot of that from German writing and German academia versus, Latin if it's like, or scientific, Greek, very often for medical terminology. A lot of that comes from Greek terms. French for sort of cultured shit, like, okay, consider how we're using it, how we're using these different languages, and pull from that according to that in a way that kind of works.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, you're right. Like French, imagine like a world where there's different languages for science. Like science has a different language that's different than the main language. Cooking has a wholly other language.
Yeah. But just in general, if you're, I don't know, let's say you're portraying like a kind of ghost, if you use a Latin term versus a German term for it, it's gonna hit different.
Yeah.
So really, really think about like, okay, what are you trying to say here? What feeling are you trying to give us? What kind of mythology are you trying to give us here?
Yeah. Like, what is it? I think that's Greek is Eidolon versus Geist in German.
Yeah.
They feel very different.
Yeah, Geist feels so different. And Geist has different connotations too. Like it can be ghost, or it can just be like spirit, as in like the spirit of friendship. Not literally like an actual ghost.
Yeah, like
ooh, the spirit of friendship. Ooh.
Or the spirit of, what is it? The spirit of the now, the zeitgeist.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to be confused with the French spirit of the staircase, which just whispers things you should have said.
Right.
That's actually a seed for a pretty funny story right there.
Yeah. Like different language spirits just fucking with you in different ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. So we've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes. I think it's time to wind down. Before we go, Karlo, where can our listeners find you and support you?
There's obviously the podcast that you named at the beginning. This is not the true name of the podcast, however, and RS does not have control over us anymore. So, yes, but you can check us out on Patreon, Podside Picnic. Personally, I have my own website, alineofinc.com, and there is a bunch of my fiction work and other writing that you can find there in the bibliography, and also just check out like I think the latest thing. The latest thing is like a little bit more than a year old now. Is in Strange Horizons, Up in the Hills, she dreams of her daughter deep in the ground. But if you haven't checked it out yet, which I'm pretty sure everyone that listens to this, like rather follows the podcast has probably already read it. But if you haven't, and in case you missed it, check it out in Strange Horizons.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yep, thanks for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Until next time, keep writing good.
This has been Rite Gud with R.S. Benedict. It was hosted by R.S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Theme song by OK Glass. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegood@kittysneezes.com. That's RITEGUD at kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/RiteGud. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production.
kittysneezes.com in color.